Reverend Don Lewis, coming to you from the beautiful metaverse, and more specifically from beautiful Danville, Illinois, homeland of the Corellian tradition. And with me is Krys Copeland. Welcome, Krys.
Thank you. Good to be back.
And welcome, everyone. This is Midday with Reverend Don. Today we're going to be talking about what's new at Corellian Publishing. And as you know, if you regularly follow Midday with Reverend Don, you can type your questions or comments into whatever platform you're watching on. They'll show up here in the chat room. Although we do not have the chat room on the screen today because we have a guest. So, what have we got for today, Krys?
Well, I'm actually really excited to talk about your new book. We've been going through some of the editing for the first few chapters, and it's just been a lot of fun to work through and to kind of learn about, especially in these beginning chapters, the different cultures around the world and their uses for stones and different metals throughout history. Could you kind of maybe highlight a few of the particular cultures that were important for you to include in this?
Certainly, and I want to say hello to Janet Gann in the chat room and Christine Higginbotham. It's good to see you.
Hi, Janet. Hi, Christine. Good to see you.
Well, if you look at various cultures, they all often have a preference for certain stones they think of as being sacred or particularly magical. And usually it's in that context. And if you look at East Asia, you will see jade used that way very extensively. Certainly not the only stone that they use, but it's highly associated with Asian culture because it was very, very highly venerated and very widely used. In the New World, we often see that with, or the Western world, I guess we would say, we see that with what's called jadeite, which is a similar stone that sometimes is also called jade. And many pre-Columbian cultures here used those stones in the same way. If we look at ancient Egypt, they had certain stones they preferred to use, although they used all kinds of different stones. But lapis lazuli was very big for them, and throughout the Fertile Crescent. And of all of the different stones you see in that region, lapis lazuli and carnelian are two of the most common. But they also had turquoise, they had malachite, they had many others that they also used. But that's true of all of these different cultures. If you look at the Greeks and Romans, pearls become very important, which technically is not a stone, but we're treating it as a stone. And certainly coming down into European history, pearls remain very important and are still important today. We want to say hello to Renee in the chat room, and Martin in the chat room, and Ed the Pagan in the chat room, and Timothy in the chat room. Hello, everybody.
Hi, everybody. Good to see you.
It's also interesting to see how different metals have been used. In most of the world, gold is usually the most valuable metal, but that's not universal. In ancient Egypt, silver was considered more valuable than gold. And the reason is that Egypt was a producer of gold, but there was no silver in Egyptian territory. It was all imported and therefore more expensive. So when you look at the famous coffin of, or sarcophagus of Tutankhamun, mummy case, that would be the term. And it's all this beautiful gold work. And you think that must be the height of a valuable Egyptian mummy case. But actually an argument could be made that the mummy case of Susenis, I believe Susenis II, which is made entirely of silver with a little bit of gold work in it, for them would have been a more valuable piece of work, which is something you just don't know if you're not familiar with that aspect of history or why they made that association. One of the things in all cultures that makes certain stones or metals more valuable is the rarity with which they are found. But also, at the other end, the commonality with which they are found. When we were mentioning lapis lazuli, one of the reasons it was so popular in that Fertile Crescent area was that it was relatively plentiful. And so it could be widely used. One of the things I think many people don't know, you can get lapis lazuli necklaces from thousands of years ago through the archaeological market because there are so many of them that they're not generally considered to be of museum quality. The good ones are in the museums, and the other ones are used to raise money for archaeological digs. And I was rather surprised when I learned that. And it's true of many kinds of archaeological artifacts that are very plentiful. Oil lamps are another example. You can get a Greek or Roman oil lamp relatively inexpensively if you want one, because they made them by the millions. And they survive in the millions. And hello to Mary Hawk in the chat room. It's good to see you.
Hi, Mary. Good to see you.
One of the Instagram channels I follow is called Moon Honey Jewelry. And she mostly talks about historical jewelry, but very often jewelry of the ancient world. And it's fascinating to see these pieces from all over the world that she talks about. And to see one of the things that I've noticed and been made mindful of watching her is the way that our definition of stones has changed. And that is, it used to be that, for example, what was considered a ruby was not based on the same things we consider a ruby now. It was much more based on the color. So what we today would call a spinel was formerly considered a ruby. And I've heard it described as an imposter ruby, but it wasn't. What happened is we changed our definition when we were able to start studying the molecular nature of stones and started to classify them that way. But earlier we'd classified them by color. So when you read about a massive emerald in the Roman Empire, chances are it was a beryl or some other green crystalline stone. Though it could have been an emerald, they certainly had them. When you read about a massive ruby, it could very well have been a spinel, possibly even a garnet under certain circumstances. Our definitions of stones have changed. So when you read any ancient book that talks about particular stones, it's not necessarily what we would call the same stones today. And Timothy in the chat room remarks that some stones can be pulverized and used as cosmetics or art supplies. And this is absolutely true. For most of history, painting was done with pulverized stones and a binding agent. If you look at those beautiful Greco-Roman wall frescoes, they were done with pulverized stone to give the color. Well down toward the modern era, and still sometimes today, that's how colored pigments are made. Although today they're often artificial, but
mica
you can still have them.
Yeah, mica is often used in cosmetics, especially to give it a shine. So that's something also to just kind of be aware of like properly sourcing stones. Sometimes you need to research where you're getting them from, because some of those stones can be linked to mines where child work is taking place or things like that. So just try to be mindful also if you're sourcing stuff that has that pulverized stone in it. Try to do some research on where it comes from. And there's even like an initiative now among the cosmetic companies that have agreed to source either only synthetic mica or only from mines that have been properly certified as not using child labor.
Very good. We want to say hello to Steve in the chat room. Hello, Steve.
Hi, Steve. Good to see you. And Timothy also wonders if AI assistance for lapandary. Could you expand on what that is? I hope I'm not mispronouncing it. Lapandary?
Lapidary.
Lapidary.
We're working with stones, and yeah, he's wondering if AI will discover new things. I'm sure it will. I can't imagine it won't.
Certainly for synthetic, potentially synthetic materials.
And it may also expand our knowledge of how we classify certain stones. It wouldn't be the first time that's changed. I think AI is going to be very transformative across the board. Now, the other thing Timothy mentioned, and hello to Reverend Eric in the chat room. It's good to see you, Reverend Eric.
Hi, Reverend Eric. Good to see you. And yeah, that's something that you also talk about in the book is how can you use synthetic stones in
Hmm.
magic, man-made stones, and even like sourcing man-made diamonds now
Hmm.
is really the more ethical way to go. And
No,
but
and
at
for
the same
most
time,
people,
it's
it's the
it's
far more practical way to go.
exactly, yeah. So it makes sense on a lot of different levels.
But yeah, I'm a great believer in the use of synthetic stones because they're still stones. They're still the same structure. If by synthetic we mean laboratory created, hello to Arlene in the chat room. It's good to see you.
Hello, Reverend Arlene. Good to see you.
I was talking, I think, last week. Lady Crystal has a ruby that dates from the 1920s or slightly earlier and has been passed down in our family. But it's a laboratory created ruby. We've been creating them in the lab that long. And it is certainly a very magical stone, just as much as a natural ruby would be. But the difference between a laboratory grown stone and a natural one is a laboratory grown stone will be much more stereotypical in its nature, much more what you expect the stone to be. And a natural stone can vary considerably. Uh, and Reverend Eric says, Reverend Arlene and I went away to Salem this weekend, and I bought her over $100 in new crystals for divination. That's wonderful.
Yes, yes.
And the stones have very wide metaphysical application, and they always have. If you look at, again, ancient Egypt, you will notice that for ceremonial blades, they were often made of stone rather than metal, at least in early periods. And there are a variety of reasons for that, but it's generally thought it was because of the metaphysical properties they felt resided in the stone as opposed to the metal. And also, sometimes metal would be used because it was considered to have its own metaphysical properties, especially if it was associated with a meteorite. And metal acquired through meteorites was considered to be particularly strong and effective. And so you'll occasionally find out that a certain ancient sword or dagger is made from meteoritic stone. And it was for those metaphysical purposes as much as any other reason. The other thing I was going to comment on, Timothy had mentioned stones being pulverized to be used in cosmetics. And yes, they often were. And that was a very big thing in ancient Egypt. Now we're going to have a message from our sponsor, and I'll be back in a few moments, and I will leave the program to Krys until I return.
Everyone, we are back now. If you didn't get a chance to take a look at the screen during that commercial, our sponsor today is Equinix Learning Hub, and you can find them at equinox-learning.com. Not Equinix. Equinix is a company I've done some work with for business English, but Equinox, like the seasonal holiday. So Equinox Learning is a really interesting. I've been taking a look at their website today, and they have a homeschool curriculum for pagan parents. So this is something that our community has needed for a while. And in addition to the homeschooling curriculum, they also offer a very interesting online newsletter with tips for parents for each season. And this includes things like crafts to do with your kids or games to play as a family. And even in the fall when they have chili cook-off recipes. So check that out at their website, equinox-learning.com. And going back to Reverend Don's book, I have to say I'm really excited about this one. Working through it today, there was a lot of interesting information that I learned about spirits and stones, and how there can be an energy that is attached to that stone, and how in the past people, of course, had this belief as well. Quartz crystals are, of course, known for keeping away negative spirits. So there is that connection there with being able to control the movement of spirits and things like that. But also, even farmers back in the medieval times of Europe and prior would carry a piece of flint in their pocket to keep bad weather away, or the spirits' bad weather away. So there's again that connection to the natural world. Um, and we'll have Reverend Don expand on this as he comes back, but he also expands into the book about the idea of sympathetic magic, and provides interesting correspondences, not just for like the colors of stones and what the color energy could mean for them, but also assigning their meanings based on shape. Is what is a pointed stone best for versus a round orb or something like that. So definitely a great deep dive into those different concepts around what a stone can stand for or can represent in spell work. And before we continue on with Reverend Don's book, let's switch over a bit and talk a little about Reverend Ed's book that's coming out soon, Ed Hubbard's Witch Wars Manual 2, Volume 2. And I had a great conversation with Ed yesterday about where he's at on writing the manuscript for it, and the details that have been coming out. Just have been really shocking, especially the case study for the Corellian Succession War. That in particular, I've heard pieces of the story here and there from different people, but this is the first, and it's really a joint effort because Ed is asking for other leaders within the Corellian tradition to provide their own thoughts on that situation, and to make sure that he collects viewpoints across the tradition for what was happening at that time, what people were experiencing at that time, and frankly, some of the things that those who are no longer members of the tradition, but were in leadership at one time, some of the behaviors that I learned about were quite shocking, um, to the point where I don't know if it had happened to me, I might have considered pursuing legal action. But Reverend Don has and Ed have been very forgiving towards those who have caused them harm, and yeah, it's a lot to take in. It was quite shocking to learn the lengths that people went to in order to gain power that they didn't really need to gain, because they already had it and they were already on a path towards getting what they wanted, and still managed to destroy it for themselves. So definitely an interesting kind of look back at what happened to our community a couple of years ago, almost a couple of years ago. So Timothy has a question here. Curious how the podcast captures the imaginations of folks into writing and research. Well, we do get a lot of recommendations from people on here as far as what they would like to see for content coming from Corellian Publishing. So that's been particularly useful for us. And as far as capturing their imagination, I really would turn that back over to the audience. Have there been any books in particular that captured your imagination over the years with Corellian Publishing? Any books that stand out to you? Of course, I have my own favorites because I've worked on a lot of these projects. So, for certain, the original books that we did were the Reverend Don's Book of Questions, volumes 1 through 4, and because that was our first project together. That I was able to assist on, and we really started learning about what the process would look like at Corellian Publishing with that initial project, and that was done in partnership with my own company, Speak Your Own Book. So that was very, very interesting. Um, Ed has a comment here. Anything in particular that people may not know? Yeah, there was something that I did not know. I had heard pieces of the person who was removed from power um, talking about changing the bylaws without following proper procedure, and in my opinion, that's a questionable thing to do at the minimum, to change bylaws without following proper procedure. We're set up in the tradition where we have a process to go through. There's not like a king or a queen that rules us and makes all the decisions for us. There's a system of justice that's built into our bylaws, and that system was violated. And in almost Trumpian ways, I would say, to kind of draw that comparison. It's quite shocking. When I was reading through it, what came to mind were a couple of things. That this is just like an episode of Succession. That there's like some serious planned actions for takeover here that occurred, and luckily were thwarted, and it took a little while, but they were thwarted. And just how far a person would go to seize that power. So to find out the full details of that, of course, you'll need to buy the book, which you can pre-order at corellianpublishing.com. I don't want to give away the full details of it because, one, it's not my story to tell. It's Ed's story to tell with the assistance of all the leadership of the Corellian tradition. And I'm so thankful that he got their opinions on it. I don't think it would have been nearly as complete of a story without the feedback from everyone involved in that situation. And of course, I'm not actually a member of leadership. I have a second degree status within the tradition, but I'm by no means a leader. I consider myself more of a servant than anything else. What does the community need, and what ways can I serve them? And for the most part, that is just editing books. So, and helping people to publish books, which I am more than thrilled to do. I'm quite I would say, I guess, a fangirl of the tradition, even though I'm also part of the tradition. But, I get to work with some of my favorite authors in the world, people who I have admired for 20 years or longer. And so it's kind of a bit of a dream job for me to be able to work with such talented people and to continue meeting such talented people through this network of Corellian Publishing, and through our ministry work. And that includes people like Sarah Hartsong, who runs Tree of Life Interfaith Sanctuary. She's just published her ritual recipe deck with us. Check that out because we are getting ready to order another batch of those. So if you would like to get your set of the new cards, where we have some updated content and some more drawings on the back, more artwork on the back, a greater variety of artwork. So check that out at corellianpublishing.com if you'd like to pre-order your copy with the next run that we're doing. But her work with Tallis is quite fascinating. She does a lot of elder wisdom preservation herself through her PEEPS program. And Timothy says, hold on to that dream job. Editing podcasting is awesome. Absolutely right. It's a lot of fun to do editing. The podcasting I'm getting used to. It's not something that comes naturally to me. But I do enjoy it a lot, especially when I have interaction from people in the audience. It's really great to hear what you guys are thinking and what you would like to see next coming from Corellian Publishing. Going back to that dream job, though, of getting to meet all these amazing people, another person that comes to mind is Autumn Stoneflower, who is a pagan teacher and a priestess within the Corellian tradition. And she has just published her first book for middle grade pagan children, so roughly 8 to 15 years old, depending on their reading ability. And this book is about, it follows one girl in particular, but 4 girls as a group at a pagan boarding school. and goes through, it's a realistic fiction, so this is not fantastical magic, but they do perform magic in it. It's just, real magic, and it talks about the struggles that these girls go through, facing prejudice. The main character is trans, so she faces prejudice as a trans person, but also the other characters facing prejudice as Wiccans, and really gives a great example for kids of how to manage those things that they're likely experiencing in their own lives. Of course, there are higher rates of bullying among people experiencing bullying among children who are pagan. Or for many marginalized communities. So, having those books accessible for children, I think, is really important, so they can see themselves in that book and can also see that these characters still, have hope in the face of danger, have hope in the face of prejudice and bigotry, and still stay positive throughout that. And find ways to combat it without losing themselves in that process, without going down a darker path with that. Timothy says, writing a series for young adults, it has its moments. R.L. Stine is a great one to bring up in reference to that. I was a big Goosebumps fan back in the day myself. And it's great to see that those are still loved. And Stine used a great technique where he actually taught ghostwriters how to mimic his style as well. He's someone who is able to kind of train other writers on his style, and then also help them to create the book that he has envisioned. So, very interesting way of like producing books quickly that children still seem to really love. They're quite cheesy books if you look back on them now, but they're definitely memorable. I think Monster Blood is one of my favorites. I was even an R.L. Stine book for Halloween once. Everybody thought I was a cereal box, but I was definitely a book, and I was a Goosebumps book. So definitely a big fan of R.L. Stine. Timothy also brings up Lemony Snicket, another one of my favorites from Series of Unfortunate Events. I love both the books as well as the movie adaptation. So excellent suggestion, Timothy. And if you're interested in supporting a pagan children's book author, I definitely recommend Autumn's book. And in addition, she is taking the royalties that she earns from this book to actually create a pagan academy for children, so that they can have a safe place to learn in the United States. So if you'd like to help support that, then any sales that we have from that will help with creating that school. And it looks like we're getting close to the hour. Hopefully Reverend Don will be back and able to conclude for us. But just a couple of more things that I wanted to mention from Reverend Don's book, in particular, was this idea of personification, of how to connect with a stone on a personal level. And it really kind of breaks down, he breaks down in the book how to actually do that. What's the step-by-step process of really getting to know a stone, whether that is, carrying it with you throughout the day, or using it in chakra meditations, or using crystal grids to help with that. But also talks about how to use these stones for emotional healing, for gaining mental clarity, for physical healing, for spiritual growth, for protection and grounding. And those concepts were really fascinating to me, that you could kind of figure out what is the stone best for by just communicating with it and connecting with it on that level. If anyone else has their own experience with the stones, please let us know in the chat. How do you use stones in your magic? Timothy says Autumn Rider has their own website. I don't know if she has she has her own blog, but you can find her on Facebook at Autumn Writer Author page. Autumn Stoneflower author page, and you will be able to follow her on there. Also, you can just go to CorellianPublishing.com and sign up for our newsletter, and we send out updates through our newsletter about all of our latest projects with pagan authors. Everyone from Rev Don to our newest authors like Autumn and Sarah. We do have another author that I've really loved working on her book. It's coming out later this fall, and that is Laura Enright. She wrote Court of Five Tribes. She's also published several other fantasy books of the paganish genre, and so she's quite an experienced author already. And reading through her writing, preparing her book for publication, has really been just kind of a masterclass for me on really well done storytelling. She is able to turn a phrase and put you into that scene like you feel like you're really there. And her book is based on the idea that there is this tree that is dying, but the tree is protecting something from getting out, and unfortunately that evil power that it is stopping is now seeping out anyway, and is corrupting the land, which is loosely based on Chinese culture and mythology. The land that it is protecting is now receiving this dripping of negative energy from the thing that the tree is keeping locked up at the moment. And but that's okay, because there is a goddess that is going to help put things right here, and she puts into place in the world people and creatures, including dragons, that can help stop this, what's happening, stop this process. So I'm editing through it now, and it's just been a blast to do. Timothy says it has a Legend of Sleepy Hollow theme. In what way does it connect to Legend of Sleepy Hollow? I'm very curious as to how you connect with that. Do you mean like stopping the Headless Horseman from destroying the local populace, or menacing the local populace? Yeah, I could see that connection to it, absolutely. And we've come up on our time here today, so I'm just going to do a quick prayer. I'm an atheist, so I will make it mostly a prayer to the universe for tonight. But we will wrap it up now and head out for the day, or for the evening for people on my side of the world. So thank you so much for joining today. I ask that the universe bless us. I ask that the universe grant us the energy we need to continue throughout the rest of our day and into our evenings, to keep us safe, and to keep us healthy, and to keep us whole. All right. And thank you so much for joining today. It has been a pleasure listening to your comments in the chat, and sharing this time with you. And I look forward to our next time together. Blessed be, everyone.